My take is Our Lady of Fatima. Russia is going to spread its errors throughout the world. Russia must be consecrated, right? She doesn't say, she might, since Russia is spreading its errors throughout the world, it seems strange that she asks for Russia to be consecrated. She doesn't ask for France or Italy or Germany or England or the United States to be consecrated. She asks for Russia. Now Russia is going to be, from Fatima onwards, or very soon after Fatima, I mean, again, heaven was giving this solution just in front of the problem. The problem broke out with the Russian Revolution, 2 months before, I think it was. October, the message, oh no, what month did Our Lady Fatima talk? What month was the secret? It was July, was it? July, yes. July, then it's July to October, a few months. July, June, July, August, September. The Russian Revolution, October. The message about Russia, July. Heaven was getting in there first, so to speak, and providing the remedy ahead of the problem. If Catholics were realizing that there was a serious problem in the church, they would have listened to Fatima. Our Lady complained at a given point that neither the good nor the bad are paying attention to Fatima. She had to complain. And that was a serious defect of the Catholics at that time. That was an anticipation, a real symptom of the coming disease and collapse of Vatican II. They didn't pay attention to Fatima. But if you pay attention to Fatima, then it's clear she wants Russia to be consecrated. And moreover, the consecration of Russia will be the turning point of the whole problem of Russia, the whole problem of the modern world, once that consecration is done. And by praying the rosary, you help, especially if you pray the rosary explicitly to obtain the consecration of Russia, then you're really going to contribute something useful to the world. You bash the police and it's useless. You pray the rosary for the consecration of Russia, you're doing more, believe it. You're doing more than the tanks and rockets and submarines of Putin. The physical war is entirely secondary. What really matters is the spiritual war. Spirit governs matter, matter does not govern spirit. The materialists don't even believe in the existence of spirit, because they don't want it to reproach them. She asked for Russia to be consecrated. That means there's something in Russia which there isn't in the other nations. Russia is the hope of today. And Putin, I think the most intelligent observers, some people say Putin is one of the villains. He's playing along with the unmentionables, and actually he is a tool of the unmentionables, the Red Sea pedestrians, and therefore he's a bad guy pretending to be a good guy. I don't believe it. I think he's a good guy pretending to be a bad guy. He's pretending in order to be able to operate as a politician in the modern world, he's got to do some pretending. He's got to pretend, for instance, that Henry Kissinger is his friend. Henry, my pal Henry, he says. I don't believe it. And I don't believe that Kissinger is his friend. But they're both very clever men. And they're both playing to their gallery. Kissinger is helping to bring on the New World Order. Putin is trying to stop the New World Order. Therefore, they're far too smart not to know what the other is up to. Therefore, they're playing games in public. We love one another. We're buddies. Or Putin is playing games in public because that's what he has to do as a politician in the modern world. But it's only games. The real Putin has solid common sense. He has a measure of Christian religion by his Russian Orthodoxy and by his baptism as a little child by his mother. He's a decent man because if anybody has stopped the Third World War already happening, I think it's Putin. He's had many opportunities to let it loose. He has held, his Russian generals and admirals have been straining at the leash to get the war going so that they can smash the United States, which they possibly would, which they possibly will. God knows. In any case, I think at the moment he's the key man, and I think I really think, I can be wrong, God knows, I don't know, but I think he is a good man. I think he did not, when he went into the Ukraine, he went in with a minor force, a small army, and his express purpose was not to damage too much infrastructure and not to kill civilians. And he gave his army those instructions. And therefore, the Russian army went in on tiptoes, so to speak. That gave the propagandists the opportunity to say that he's pussyfooting. He's weak, he's silly. And that not at all. He's tough. He's tough, and he shows it by how he is slaughtering the Ukraine now. Why is he now slaughtering the Ukraine? Because the Ukrainians refuse to talk. Prompted by America, prompted by those who control America. We know who they are, right? The awkward people. Awkward, WKW. We know who, WKW. So we'll call them the awkward people. The awkward people control the United States. The awkward people absolutely want the Third World War. And Putin is trying to stop them. Therefore, it's not possible, I don't think it's possible that he's an enemy of, or a friend of the bad guys. That's a cinema he has to play out in public. But underneath, actions speak louder than words. The palsy-walsy stuff with the Red Sea pedestrians is words, but the action is against evil, the evil of those behind the Ukraine. The Ukraine is merely proxy war. The country has been virtually destroyed, but it's the fault of the Ukrainians. It's not the fault of the Russians, because the Ukrainians will not submit to common sense, to good sense. Their leader along this wrong path is one of those people, and the American who dispossessed the democratically elected ruler of Ukraine and replaced him with the present ruler of Ukraine was one of them, a stateswoman in the State Department of the United States. She's a wicked woman. And he's a wicked man. I mean, they refuse to submit. I do not believe that Putin is wanting to recreate the Russian Empire. If he'd been able to negotiate a peace, which he wanted to, and the Ukrainians were ready to negotiate, 2 months. Putin invaded in February. In the month of April, there nearly took place negotiations. It's the Americans who stopped it. Am I off the track there, anybody? It's the Americans who insisted upon the war going ahead. It's the Americans who have been insisting ever since upon the war going ahead, because they want Russia to be defeated. They want Russia to be weakened and defeated so that they can then go on to China, destroy China, and then the Americans will hand over to we know who the ruling of the world. They may not think that they're going to hand it over, but that's the glories of the American empire are the illusion, the taking over the world by we know who is the reality, or the dream and ambition of taking it over. That's, in my opinion, what's all behind the war. And it'll go on until at last there's no more Ukrainians to fight. 400,000 Ukrainians have been killed. 400,000 men have been killed. And a lot more maimed and wounded, of course, against a relatively small figure of Russian killed. The Russians have got power. They're soldiers, they're strong soldiers, and they've got good scientists. And they've got weapons and they've developed this this aerial warfare, which is new, by drones and by satellites, and then guns which can, in contact with the area, the overflying, close contact, enabling the guns to be very exactly aimed so that the Ukrainians are just blown to pieces wherever they try to get together and fight. It's not fair, the fight. The fight is just not fair. And NATO is a miserable affair under the power of the Americans, and very much under the power of the Americans, because NATO has been leaning on America for years and years. Trump said to NATO, hey, stop sponging off us. Stop relying upon us to defend you. You can pay for yourselves to defend yourselves. Good sense, common sense. But the Europeans have been spoiled by the Americans, with Americans protecting them for tens of years now, ever since the Second World War, or ever since the threat of communism to Europe. It's the Americans who protected Europe, and that guarantee has largely stopped Europe being invaded by the communists. You may remember Stalin wanted to invade Europe in 1941. A huge Russian army was right there on the German border, both of them halfway through Poland, in the middle of Poland. The two armies were on at a frontier, a mutual frontier, and Stalin was about to invade Europe, and would have gone through Europe like a knife through butter, probably, a communist, fanatical communist army, and it was Hitler who stopped it. What did I say? It was Hitler who stopped it by beating him to the punch, by a relatively small German army attacking the Russians, all prepared for attack, not prepared for defense. Hitler attacked them on an attacking basis when they weren't ready to defend themselves, and they walked all the way practically to Moscow and Leningrad. The Germans went through, because the Germans are also, of course, very good soldiers, and they were fighting communism. But communism, well, it isn't really as bad as all that. Our media tell us that communism is really quite nice. And our media are wonderful tellers of the truth, aren't they? And television says the same thing. Oh, how nice they are. And Hitler, oh, he's the devil incarnate. Oh, oh. And the Nazis, who could be so nasty as the Nazis? The Nazis are the epitome of evil and horror. Come on, come on, come on. Get real. Catholics, get real. You don't have to say that Hitler was an angel or a saint in order to recognize that he successfully fought against communism. He stopped Stalin from taking over the whole of Europe. At the end of the war, when the Allies, you know what Churchill said about it? We stuck the wrong pig. That's what he said about the end of the Second World War. It's a famous quote. Doesn't usually appear in the media, because that quote suggests that Churchill thought that the Russians were the real enemy and not the Germans. Because the Germans were fighting they were fighting for the relics of Christianity, which is national. Nationalism at its best is not good nationalism, because it's not anchored to God. The nationalists don't want anything to do, many nationalists don't want anything to do with God, just like everybody else. They're part of the system. But nationalism is better than internationalism, or National Socialism is better than international socialism. Communism is international socialism. Nazism was national socialism. The Ukrainians are destroyed, virtually destroyed. It's a shame. But I think that, I dare to think, again, it's not quite politically correct to think so, or to say so, I think that the slaughter of the Ukraine is God's judgment, is the judgment of God upon them. And that Putin is, in this respect, Russia and Putin have been doing God's work. Ukraine is extremely corrupt. The Europeans send all of this tremendous amount of machinery, of weapons, of tanks and so on, to the Ukraine, and the Ukrainians sell it off to the rest of the world and make money. It's very corrupt. On Ukrainian territory at the beginning of the war were 20 American laboratories for doing wicked medical research on horrible diseases, which was forbidden by law in the United States. What country receives the laboratories in order to receive the money? Ukraine. That's another sample of Ukraine's corruption. And the country is too corrupt. When you go too far against God's law, God uses some human instrument to destroy you. That's a generalization, obviously, with different applications. But I think that if the real explanation of the slaughter of Ukraine by the Russians is not the wickedness of the Russians. I think it is that Almighty God had had enough of Ukrainian corruption. And I think one other thing I learned at the time, and I think is true, could somebody confirm it or infirm it? The first thing the Russians did when the Ukraine was they knew where these 20 laboratories were, and they destroyed them. They probably took the papers and the proof that what they were doing, but it was a very sane and healthy thing to do. Ukraine was doing something very insane and very unhealthy. The Russians went in, and the first thing they did was to stop that. And then they withdrew, the Russian army withdrew from certain positions, not because it was weak, but all our vile propaganda, all our vile media, always in the hands of the same people. These vile liars lie that Russia is weak, that Putin is weak, that he's pussyfooting because he's weak. Russia is strong. Since the Ukrainians would not have the good sense to do what all that Putin wanted when he invaded Russia was denazification and demilitarization, which is fair, reasonable. Demilitarization. Stop Ukraine being a military base as a threat upon Russia. And then, of course, you recall how the Americans reacted when the Russians tried to put missiles in Cuba, which was much too close to the United States. And that was the threat of war. Khrushchev wisely backed down. Kennedy stood up. Khrushchev wisely backed down. But the Americans did not want a platform for missiles right next to them. The Russians don't want Ukraine as a platform for NATO or America right next to them. Reasonable. Demilitarization of Ukraine. So he wants to destroy the Ukrainian army. He's certainly done it. He's destroyed 3 armies, one after another. The first army was prepared by NATO and by the United States and was in good shape. But the Russians smashed it to pieces. After that first softly, monkey at the beginning, Russia toughened up. Because it's insisting upon that demilitarization, that denazification. The Nazification is horrible. That's the Azov Brigade. There are not carryover from the Second World War. There's this Nazi element in Ukrainian politics, which Russia again didn't want, and insists on coming to an end. There's also the Russian Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church in Ukraine. The Russian Orthodox Church more in the east, the Catholic Church in the west. For instance, what's that big city in the west? Lvov? Lvov is a Catholic city. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The eastern Ukraine was part of the Austro. Therefore, there's a lot of Catholicism in the western. The western Ukraine has got a lot of Catholicism. I don't know how the Catholics in the western Ukraine have been reacting, because of course patriotism is also always becomes strong in war, and any normal Ukrainian will have loved his country.